Going to, well, you're not going to Australia. So you declined Australia?
Well, that has to do with the laws about who's allowed to get into Australia.
Ah, right.
We're going to start with the Gemara in Rosh Hashana on Daf Chav Ches. And since Kabbalah Satorah means accepting the Taryag mitzvahs, the Gemara is going to address a very fundamental question. What is a mitzvah? We know that a mitzvah requires what's called a Maisa mitzvah. And the Maisa mitzvah culminates with a Kiyuma mitzvah. But what about Kavana?
So which page are we doing now? Which page are we doing?
So it should say on it, it may say Ches Aleph, which is Chelik Aleph. The Inyan mitzvahs einam trichas Kavana.
Gotta find that. 1 second. Ah, yes. It's gone.
Found it?
Yep.
So the Gemara Rosh Hashana Daf Chav Ches addresses this question. Sholchu lei li'avua de Shmuel. They sent a question to Avua de Shmuel. Kafo v'yochal matzah. They actually forced him to eat matzah. And the answer was yotza. Interesting. You know, normally a person is motivated to do a mitzvah and he has in mind the intention to fulfill God's will. But here, they forced him to do a mitzvah. Usually he get forced to do an Aveirah, chas v'sholom. And then we have the sugi of Kiddush Hashem, or Gal Yavar, and the big three and all that. Here they forced him to do a mitzvah. I don't know why. So the Gemara asks, kafu man. Ilema kafu shade, which means there was something inside of him. You know, I guess you'd say it, some insanity, some craziness. He really didn't want to eat the matzah, but Matanya itim cholam itim chotek chu cholam arev kikech shelte arev kishote l'chol dvara. Right, kafu shade, at that point in his life, he becomes a shote. He's not working with a full deck, as we would say. You know, he's not using his rational faculties, and he's potter. Now, if a person eats matzah, for that matter, fulfills any mitzvah when he's potter, then as soon as that barrier is removed, and now he's got a full-fledged chiyuv, he's going to have to repeat the mitzvah. He was not yotze at the time when he was a lav bar chiyuva. Like if you could imagine a case where a katan becomes bar mitzvah at 10 p.m. on the night of Pesach, according to the man who holds meis leis. So he ate the matzah at 9 p.m. He's going to have to eat it again a second time at 10 p.m. So if he was a shota because kafu shade and he ate the matzah at 9, he's going to have to eat a matzah at 10 when he is successful in dispelling the powers of the shade, meaning he regains his mental capacity. Rav Ashi shekavu parsiim. Again, go figure out why the Parsiim, the Persians, forced him to eat matzah on the night of Pesach. So Omar Rav is also meres hatokea l'shir yotza. So we're going to derive a conclusion here about Tkiyas Shofar.
But by shofar, you got a bracha. You have to be having mind to be yotze from the bracha.
Right, but we're assuming that even if in matzah you need a bracha or in shofar you need a bracha, ein ha-bracha ma'keves es ha-mitzvah. So obviously, in the case where he's being forced, you know, on the gunpoint by Parsi and Peter Matzah, he's not making any brachas. That from the Parsiim are not. And in the case of Tokel Shir, he's not making any brachas. He's blowing the shofar, having a good time. He's blowing what's called reverie. No, how do you say it? You know,
revelry.
revelry when they wake them up in the morning.
Yeah, revelry.
Revelry. I went to the army here in Israel. They didn't blow revelry. I was very disappointed. Anyway. So I don't know. He likes the music of the shofar. I mean, honestly, I could think of more pleasant instruments than the shofar. In any event, Yotza. So Rava says, based on the psak of Avua de Shmuel says that if I was forced to eat matzah, I fulfill my mitzvah. If I blow the shofar on Rosh Hashana for the sake of shir, I'm yotze the mitzvah. And now the Gemara is going to, shall I say, I'll just do something technological here to improve the sound. Excuse me. See if it works. So now the Gemara is going to proceed on a sort of like a different note and investigate the possibility that in the case of shofar, you must have kavana. And shofar is going to be the exception to the rule. We'll see the Rambam is going to paskin in the case of shofar that you need kavana, but in the case of matzah, he's going to paskin you don't need kavana. And the Rishonim are going to try to reconcile that. But we could perhaps reconcile that based on the Gemara that we're about to learn, that shofar is different. So the Rambam might say that in general, mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavana. Therefore, if they force you to eat matzah on Leil Pesach, you are yotze. But yet in the case of shofar, there's a special, unique nature of the mitzvah of shofar. And the nature of that mitzvah requires kavan. Because with regard to shofar, the Torah says, zichron trua. And the concept of zichron requires a certain mental awareness. Right? There's no such thing as zichron as a biblical term. You cannot fulfill zichron without some mental awareness. So that's what the Gemara says, that the Torah says achol matzah, right? It says ba'erev tochlu matzahs v'ka'achal. You can't deny that he ate the matzah. Aval hacha, but here in the case of shofar, zichron trua ksiv. And zichron requires a certain awareness. I am now hearing the shofar. You know, you could pontificate on this for hours. You know, I'm aware of the fact that it's like the shofar of the Isle of Yitzchak on the Akedah. I'm aware of the fact that the shofar somehow accomplishes up in Shamayim that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gets off the Kisei Adin, the Kisei HaMishpah, and he sits on the Kisei HaRachamim. With the shofar, I remember the shofar of Har Sinai, and you go on and on and on. I think Rav Saadia Gaon has 10 reasons. Some of the Machzorim have it, a list of 10 reasons for shofar. But the fact that he's blowing, you know, a wake-up song on Rosh Hashana with a shofar, that's not zichron true. So Rava is apparently being machadesh a chiddush in shofar that you wouldn't have known from matzah. You know, in matzah, okay, there's a ma'aseh mitzvah, a physical act of eating the matzah. I did it robotically, mechanically. I was just trying to save my skin from the parsium. I didn't have any kavanah whatsoever. The mitzvah was the last thing on my mind. But at least I have a ma'aseh mitzvah to talk about. But in the case of shofar, where the Torah requires zichron trua, you know, you're blowing a nice revelry in the morning with the shofar, that's not zichron trua. Kamash Malon, Rava comes to with the chiddush that even if you do a ma'aseh mitzvah of shofar, l'shem shir, you didn't have any kavana, there was no zichron trua. Nevertheless, zichron trua is a, shall we say, an embellishment of the mitzvah. It's like a hidur mitzvah. But it's not a critical part of the mitzvah of shofar. Because elsewhere in the Torah, it says, Yom Trua Yelachem. It doesn't use the word zicha. Okay. Let me just take out Rashi for a moment, because I see Rashi's not on the page. Maybe Rashi adds something here. I think what Rashi's saying here is that Einochinami, with regard to Zichron Trua, he's misasik, meaning he's not involved in Zichron Trua at all. But he's Yotze because it's still a mitzvah of blowing the shofar, hearing the shofar, of Yom Trua Yelachem. There's an interesting comment here of Rabbeinu Chananel. Omar Ravazos Omer Satokel Shir Yotza Kigon. See, I said it was revelry. Kigon Hodich Siv Hallelu B'Seika Shofar. That Hallel, this is the Hallel in the Beis HaMikdash, has to be accompanied b'seika shofar, with the tekiah of a shofar, to tokim lahallel. Now, the tekiah that accompanies hallel is not what we call the seder of tekiyos, with the tekiah, shvarim, maybe a tekiah trua, and then a tekiah lachrea, and you have to do 9 kolos and so forth. That's Rosh Hashana. When he gets to Hallel, he has to accompany the Hallel with the tekiah shofar, the Leviim. Right, John, you're a Levi, right? So you got to listen up over here, right? The Rabbeinu Chananel is saying that Tokel Shir is the Leviim who are blowing the shofar as an accompaniment to Hallel. Let's say, for example, on the night of Pesach or Erev Pesach, when they brought the Korban Pesach, so they decided Hallel, and the Leviim would blow the shofar. That's what it seems from the Rabbeinu Chananel. And we'd have to learn more of the halachas here, the details of Halu B'Teika Shofar. He says, Afal Pi Shehu L'Shir, right? The purpose of the Leviim is to create a song. And the Shira with the carbon, like the Nisach HaYayin and so forth, it's also a shir. There are many dimensions of the carbon that embellish the carbon with a shir. One of them is blowing the shofar at the time of Hallel. Hashomei Yotz. Why? Ki mitzvahs ein tzrichas kavon. I'm not sure why Rabbeinu Chananel was compelled to introduce the pasuk Halu B'Teika Shofar and explain that Tokel Shir was the tekiah at the time of the Hallel. I mean, the Rabbeinu Chananel didn't have to add that. Rashi doesn't add that. I mean, he just could have said Tokel Shir. He likes the music of the shofar. Unless Rabbeinu Chananel was bothered by our question, of all the musical instruments he chose was the shofar. That's a little bit odd. And on Rosh Hashana to boot. Okay. Now, how do we paskin? Do we assume that a person has to have kavana for a mitzvah or not? So the Ran, who writes the super commentary on the Rif in Masechet Rosh Hashana, again, it happens to be published on the 7th page of the Rif, but it's the Ran on this sugya in Rosh Hashana Chav Ches. He says, Mitzvah strichas kavana lotzes v'chein pasuk Rambam Zal The Perik Sheni Milchus Shofar. The Rama Paskin, the Tzarech she's kavin mashmiya lahotzi v'shomea lotzes. You need a double kavana. You need that the blower has to have in mind to be motzi, the one who listens to the shofar, plus the one who listens to the shofar has to have kavana lotzes, that he's fulfilling the mitzvah of Hashem. Holav hachi lo yotza. So the Ran now presents what he thinks is a contradiction within the Rambam. El shebeperik vav milchus chametz umatzah kosav kafu v'yochal matzah yotza. Is the Rambam contradicting himself? In shofar he requires kavana, and in matzah he does not require kavana. If it was up to me, I would have said that shofar is different. That the rule is the Rambam in Hilchas Chametz Umatzah, and the exception to the rule is shofar. But the Ran is going to go in the opposite direction. He's going to postulate that the Rambam's rule on this fundamental issue, whether a mitzvah needs kavanah or not, is formulated in Hilchas Chametz Umatzah. And that's going to be the paradigm for all other mitzvahs. The Rambam doesn't feel compelled. What did I just say? I forgot what I just said. What I meant to say, just to make sure I said what I meant to say, was that according to the Ran, the paradigm is Hilchas Shofar. Did I say the other way around? I said it the other way around. Okay, I apologize. So let's just rewind. So according to the Ran, shofar becomes the paradigm, and the Rambam does not have to repeat elsewhere in other mitzvahs what he wrote in Hilchas Shofar, and matzah is going to be the exception to the rule. And the Rambam is going to prove to us, according to the Ran, that matzah is very special within the constellation of mitzvahs. And because of that special nature of the mitzvah of eating matzah, that's why we could drop the Rambam drops the requirement of kavanah. And even if he was forced to eat the matzah, and the last thing in the world in his mind was to fulfill the mitzvah of matzah, he's just saving his skin, he was yotze. Because matzah is upgraded. Now, the key word in the Ran, as we go through it, to explain why matzah is different and doesn't require kavanah, is the word hana. Now, you and I might say, well, I didn't enjoy the matzah so much. Again, if you got good, maybe machine-baked matzahs, I don't know, maybe even hand-baked matzahs. I don't know. My mother-in-law loves hand-baked matzahs the whole year round. Crazy. Anyway, you get some sort of physical pleasure from the matzah. If you're hungry, it fills up your stomach. Let's just leave it at that. Now, how many mitzvahs in the world, if you had a list of Ramach Esed, how many of them have a certain hana built into the mitzvah? Very few. Although, I'm thinking out loud now, in sukkah, there is a certain benefit that you get from sitting in the sukkah, but actually, if you live in a cold climate, or in a country where by the time sukkah comes around, it's a little bit chilly, I'm not sure how much hana you get from the sukkah. If it's a boiling hot day, and maybe you get the shade of the sukkah, maybe you do get some hana from the schach of the sukkah, I don't know. But I certainly wouldn't say that the essence of the mitzvah of Maisa Yeshiva B'Sukkah is a Maisa Hana. And again, if you go through all the mitzvahs, I don't know that you'll find too many other than matzah where the achila itself defines the mitzvah. So the Ran seems to be saying the following, that when you look at Maisa Mitzvah and you ask yourself the question, do I need kavana or not? The answers to that would be, do I need kavana to upgrade the Maisa into and give it a status of a Maisa Mitzvah? And one man the over says yes, and one man the over says no. One man the over says, you know what? Mitzvah ain't trichas kavana. The Maisa Mitzvah is koveas atzmo. It has its own self-confidence. I'm a Maisa Mitzvah, and therefore, if you implement me, says the Maisa Mitzvah, if you could talk, you're yotz. But if you find a special status, an upgraded status to the Maisa Mitzvah, then even if I paskin mitzvahs trichas kavana, which according to the Ran is the Rambam's opinion, I don't need kavana. And the Maisa is koveas atzma. Now, where do we find that we give a chashivus to a Maisa simply because it's hana, there's a benefit, a physical benefit from the Maisa? So that we're going to derive from chelef, and now we're going to turn the corner over here. We're going to talk about an avera, and the man ate chelef without any intention whatsoever to violate the Torah law. He thought it was shuman, which almost is it looks identical to chelef, and it turns out to be chelef. So you and I would have said that in such a case, he's not chayav a carbon, right? For a shogeg, you have to bring a carbon. But in a case where he thought he was eating shuman, and it turns out that he was eating chelef, that's called misase. He didn't even have any intention to eat chelef. So he should be potter from a carbon. The Gemara establishes increases he's chayav a carbon. Why? Because he gets hana from the chelef. So you see, says the Ran, that you upgrade the status of a Maisa as if it had kavana simply because of the hana that he got from the Maisa. Says the Ran, there's no contradiction between the two Ramas. This sphere later, but the shofar gave it the chazin and the Rabbi Zeir Amar l'shamei chavi v'tokali naktin and tzar kavana. Aval b'kafu v'yachal matzah. Even the lo chazin and b'gemara man de polagale behedja. It seems like everybody agrees that if you're forced to eat matzah, you're yotze. Lo dachinale. We're going to accept what seems to be the universally accepted opinion in the Gemara that you yotze, even though they force you to eat matzah, even though mitzvah strichas kavana. The afal gav the tekilah shofar lo yotza, and tekilah shofar is now paradigmic of all mitzvahs they require kavana, and shofar without kavana you're not yotze. Hacha here in the case of matzah. This is the exception to the rule. Shekein nen, because he enjoys the matzah and already sets up the maisa as a maisa mitzvah. Kidam rinon, like we say in the opposite case, the alma, that I'm asik b'chalavim varayos chayav shekein nen. So the maisa avera sets itself up as a maisa avera and generates a chiyuv carbon, because of that noah that he has from the Maisa Avera. So I have here I think it's the fourth source on your page, a piece from a yahrzeit that the Rav gave it's published in Shirim Zechav Amori. I'm I don't want to read through the whole text here. I'm just going to sort of highlight it or summarize it. He says that the Ran in the Rambam is saying that mitzvah tzrichas kavana. Achila doesn't require kavana. And he says that if there's a precondition, if you hold mitzvah tzrichas kavana in the kiyuma mitzvah, and here there's a typo, it should say ein adam on the third line. It says ein down. Ein adam yotzi dechavasa b'li kavana. But what's the difference between a mitzvah achila and other mitzvahs? I'll try to fix that. Halo akiyum shava b'kulam baram im naniach ki halacha shel kavana niknas biyachas li'atzma shel pe'ulas hamitzvah. Those are the words that you want to underline. Shebali kavana chaser ma'aser mitzvah. So that's what the Ran has in mind here. That mitzvahs achila in matzah is similar to the mitzvah to the avera of achila in chelev, and therefore shem shedim misasik yisod nem v'ilchas ma'isa avera. Ein adin zeh shayach lechalom v'arayis. Ken halacha shel kavana mitzvahs eino misyacheches la'achila amav ma'isa mitzvah gam im hi mishuleles kavana tza'ok. Okay. Now, I would like to suggest the following. To explain Rabbeinu Chananel. Rabbeinu Chananel insists that Tokel Shir means Halu B'Seika Shofar. I want to suggest the following. Rabbeinu Chananel agrees to the fundamental point of the Ran that the issue about mitzvah tzrichas kavana or einam tzrichas kavana revolves around the issue of the ma'isa mitzvah. Do I need kavana to set up a ma'isa mitzvah? But here I think Rabbeinu Chananel goes a step further. And he believes that kuli alma lo pligi, it's unanimously accepted that a ma'isa mitzvah has a chashivus unto itself. And therefore, fundamentally, mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavana. So therefore, if I blow shofar on Rosh Hashana, that's a ma'isa mitzvah. If I take a photo of it, it's exactly identical to the most pious Jew who puts in all his kavana. He knows all the sodos of shofar when he blows the shofar of Rosh Hashana. It looks identical. And therefore, everybody would agree that he could be yotzei the mitzvah without kavana, because there's a certain significance that's inherent to the ma'isa mitzvah, and it's kovea itself automatically as a ma'isa mitzvah. I don't need kavana for that. What is the machlokes, and what is the shita that says mitzvah tzrichas kavana? It's when his intention removes the status of Maisa Mitzvah. In other words, his intention takes the mitzvah down a different pathway. And the machlokas now becomes whether or not his kavana could remove the status, could undermine the status of the Maisa Mitzvah, and strip the Maisa Mitzvah of its status as a Maisa Mitzvah. That's the machlokas. So, for example, in the case of matzah, his intention is to save his life. Again, it's a strange phenomenon, but he has these parsim, they're putting a gun to his head. Whatever they ask him to do, he's going to do. He's not eating matzah because he's setting up an achila of matzah. If they would ask him to jump off a third-story roof, or they'll shoot him, he'll jump off a third story as well. So now the Maisa takes on a different complexion. But here, Rabbeinu Chananel had a problem. What about blowing shofar Rosh Hashana? The man wants to blow shofar because of whatever crazy reason he likes. It's still a Maisa Mitzvah. So Rabbeinu Chananel came up with a theory that Tokeh L'Shir means he undermines the status as the Tkiyas a shofar for the sake of Rosh Hashanah, and instead he's blowing for a different mitzvah. And Rabbeinu Chananel says the following, that if a man is obligated to mitzvah X, and he does a Maisa Mitzvah in order to fulfill mitzvah Y, now we're going to have a machlokas. Can he fulfill the mitzvah of X with that Maisa when his intention was to fulfill a different mitzvah? So if Tokeh L'Shir means he has a musical benefit from it, that's a parva action. And if he does it on Rosh Hashanah, with all this kisidron, with all the requirements of shofar, then everybody would agree that he's Yotzeh. The chiddush of Rava is that mitzvahs einam tzrichas kavana in Tokeh L'Shir because he had kavana for a different mitzvah. And as a result, one man d'Omar, not Rava, would maintain that he's not Yotzei the mitzvah because he's changed the nature of the mitzvah. He's changed the nature of the Maisa mitzvah. So Rabbeinu Chananel agrees to everything the Ran said, namely, that kavana is a requirement in the Maisa mitzvah. But Rabbeinu Chananel was mechadej that what he does is automatically a Maisa mitzvah. He doesn't have to have a mental awareness and press a button, I want this to be a mitzvah. It's automatically a Maisa mitzvah. Unless he has in mind something other than the mitzvah. And he changes the nature of the Maisa. Oh, the Maisa happens also to be a Maisa mitzvah. Then that's going to be a machlokas. That's going to be a point of contention. With one man, the Omer is going to say, no. You can't have a mitzvah if your kavana is something that's antithetical to the mitzvah or that sets the Maisa onto a different pathway, onto a different trajectory. Any comments, criticisms? Okay. So now I'd like to go through that essay on Parshas Emor. Yeah? I'm just going to